My thrust has been community empowerment, communal transformation, social justice. Now, the other reason I came was when I was 18 at Morehouse College. I went to tell the dean of the chapel I felt I was called to the ministry. And when I went in the chapel at Morehouse, they had pictures of all these famous people connected to Morehouse all over the building. I mean, you get inspired just looking at the pictures. And there was one big picture, I mean huge, outside the dean's office. And it's a commencement 1956. There was Benjamin Mays, who at the time was the president. There was Melvin Watson, who was the chair of religion, and there was a white man. So I said to the dean, I said, well, I know, who's the white man? He said, that's not a white man, that's Adam Clayton Powell. He said, you from New York, you need to read about it. Because it was a black and white picture. He looked in that black and white picture. Like, well, I said, well, yeah, guys, that's right. So I started reading about Adam. And then I found in that moment, when I started pastoring, a model of how to integrate social and religious, social justice, public policy, and faith. And so, when I was considering coming to 1 Corinthians, factoring into this was the fact that the church was on Adam Clayton Powell Boulevard. And Adam had become this kind of distant mentor of mine. And so, we worked, we built, 2 years ago we built the Dream Center on 119th between St. Nick and Adam Clayton Powell, which is a space that I'm extremely proud of, because in there we do three things. We focus on arts, leadership development, and entrepreneurial development, mainly for young people. It's intergenerational, but it's a new model, because my rationale was arts programs being cut. They don't do leadership development in our schools. They don't talk about entrepreneurship in our schools. And so let's get a space where we can focus on these three things and really cultivate, and not just young people. Because our senior program is when I grow up, right? Because the idea is no matter how old you are, you still dream, you still push to fulfill those dreams. And that's our whole thing, that we are a community of visionaries and dreamers. And it has been a tremendous joy to be at this church, to see the growth, to see what has happened. And so this move to the political in many ways is more natural than some people from the outside may think. It's natural because for me, I believe as a pastor, I'm a public servant. That I am not, as a pastor, someone who lives and works in this kind of exclusive space, only relegated for people who are members of this church. I view my work as a servant of this community, and of the community, especially the immediate community around the church. And so to shift from being a public servant in the religious sphere to being a public servant in the political sphere, to me, is not a major leap in many ways. There are many people who say, well, why would you want to get into politics? Because politics is so dirty. And I was in D.C. Thursday night, I had a fundraiser in D.C. and they were asking those same questions. Why would you want to do this? And I said to them something. I said, a lot of quote-unquote bad politicians go in office when a lot of quote-unquote good people stay home. And a lot of people who will be great leaders don't even bother because of the nature of politics, the deceitfulness. And I'm learning firsthand how dirty this thing is, and it's tragic. But and it's designed really for those who are not willing to persevere through the foolishness. That's really what it's designed for. And I see being in it why people don't want to do it. Why they don't waste their time. And for me, for a long time, I took the route of just doing community work. But now I realize that at some point, someone has to lift up an alternative model of what is possible, even in a tainted space. An alternative model of what is possible, even in a space where people think, well, this is what it is, it's corrupt. And my motivation was, many of our congregants, members of the church, we would talk in our TNT, our Tuesday night teachings, and in some other classes, and there was so much frustration people had with the political leaders and elected officials. They didn't know how to connect. They felt that people did not care. They felt disconnected, like many people do in this community. This district, and I always say this, and when I say it, it kind of blows people's minds. This district that got expanded, you know, after the census, in the parts of the Northwest Bronx and parts of the West Side were cut off, 717,000 people. One of the larger congressional districts. The average congressional district is about 600,000. 717,000. And in the last congressional primary in 2012, 43,000 people voted. 43,000 out of 717,000. 5.8% of the constituents of this district participated in the congressional primary in 2012. And let me blow your mind, the 43,000 was a jump and bump in numbers because it was a presidential year and the excitement about voting was a little bit higher. The average year is like 38,000. Now think about that. 38,000 people vote in a district of 717,000. Which means that our congressman for many years, who I admire, has been going into Congress on about 16 to 18,000 votes. 16 to 18,000 votes. Now, what does that mean? That means many things. One, it is definitely a threat to much of the democratic process, not just here, but elsewhere. Because here's what happens for many elected officials. People wonder why some elected officials are disconnected. They say, well, it don't seem like some elected officials care. They're not engaged in what's going on the ground. But think about it. The problem with our electoral politics is that for many elected officials, winning their next campaign is the focus. The focus is winning the next campaign, not edifying people, not empowering people, not transforming lives, winning the next campaign. And here it is. If I know to win the next campaign, all I need is 18,000 votes, I can count 18,000 votes in a few blocks. And so you don't necessarily feel compelled to empower people. I was in North Carolina last night at another fundraiser, and I asked them, because I lived in Durham for 11 years and I knew the politics, I said, when was the last time you saw an elected official, local, African American, lead a voter registration drive? And they thought, I said, you know what? I haven't. And I said, there's a reason. Why would I want, if I'm an elected official that I know I need 16, 17, 18,000 votes to win, why would I want to empower people to vote? Because the smaller the pool, the more I know I will get reelected. If I expand the pool, I risk what? Not being elected. Thank you. And so this is what happens. Well, what does that also translate into D.C.? Well, this is the other problem with our electoral process, is that when people in this country do not feel empowered, or I think systematically disengaged from the process, who then has the ear of our elected officials? Special interests, big business. So decisions can be made by elected officials that are not in the best interest of their constituents, that are in their best interest. So self-service takes the place of public service, right? Why? Because they know they will not be held accountable. So you can make decisions that will benefit you and not benefit your district or your state, because you know that what? The people do not vote. The same thing we experience here in this mayoral election. People are excited, a new day in progressive politics. We got a new mayor and a progressive agenda. Many things are going to happen. But in the city of almost 9 million people, a little over 1 million people voted. So that's nothing to celebrate. Now when the majority, think about that, the majority of the people, when 75% of the people in your city do not vote, how do you celebrate that? In the primary, and when I say vote, I mean in the primaries. Because we all know we are in a heavily Democratic district. So which means what? The Democratic primary is the election. That's the election. It's not November. By November, the person is getting ready for their inauguration or their installation. But the primary is when you win. And so think about it. So people don't talk about primaries. Electors don't talk about primaries. They don't push primaries because to keep people in a place where they're not aware of what's going on. This is how we have the same, because we wonder how we have politicians all over the country who are still in place. That's part of the process. So my running is to help people reimagine their engagement, one of the reasons, with the political process. To inspire people to care again. Now, I've been doing this for 10 years. I've been doing not politics, I've been doing people work. And to me, that is what is lacking from many of our elected officials in our political process. People work, reconnecting people back to spaces where they can actually see the tangible manifestation of their vote, their voice, and their engagement. Because when you don't see that, what do? You don't engage it. And that's what's been happening. And so that's one level, on one level. The other thing is that I believe that in order for any space that has become dysfunctional to change, the only way you change is to begin piece by piece, individual by individual. Right now in D.C., D.C. is in a state of dysfunction. And I don't say that lightly. And people can say that, but I mean that literally. People talk about the do-nothing Congress, right? That phrase was coined in 1947 by Harry Truman. He called the Congress in 1947 a do-nothing Congress. He was frustrated with Congress in 1947. 1947, the Congress passed 395 bills. This Congress, 113th Congress, has passed under 60. Under 60 bills. Why? Because we've forgotten, again, people are the heart of this democracy. People are why elected officials go to D.C. and Congress and Senate, representing the interests of people. But when you have ideological purists who are so partisan that they can't get along, that means they put their personal issues ahead of the issues and agenda of the country and the people. And this is what is happening. So how do you change that? At some point, people have to go into elected office who have a passion for what is possible and such a passion for people that they're willing to get things done. Not compromise, but work together to get things done, or else this country does not move forward, period. And so there are a lot, it's amazing how there's so many people running around the country for Congress right now who traditionally have not been involved in politics. They've been community organizers, they've been clergy, they've been spiritual leaders. And it's amazing how many persons like myself are even now running. No, we didn't have a meeting about it. It just happened. It just really happened. And so many. And I feel like something is happening where there's a potential and possibility for things to shift in this country with people at the forefront again. Winston Churchill in 1941, I think it was, he addressed both houses of Congress. And he talked to, he's talking to the American politicians, and he says to them, he says, in order for any democracy to thrive fully, he said, those who are the public servants, who are elected to office, must learn to do something, and that if it is not done, will kill democracy. He said, elected officials must learn to trust people. Trust people. Because the public servant, who no longer desires to be the servant, but become the master, will undermine democracy. And this is what we're having right now in this country. Elections are being bought by big business. You can read now about the work that the Koch brothers are doing. They are buying elections all over this country in the battleground states. And their strategy, I have to say, the Republican strategy funded by people like the Koch brothers was brilliant. When President Barack Obama won in 2008, in many people's eyes, that should have never happened. African Americans should have never been president of the United States. And so what did they do? They didn't get mad and protest. They said, we're going to be obstructionists in D.C., but here's what we're going to do. We're going to go to state races. And we're going to win back state houses. Why? Because we're going to change the voter laws in these states to what? Shrink that pool. Make it harder. When you change the laws, it is proven. When you change voter laws, it impacts who? Elderly, right? Immigrants, poor people, and disproportionately African Americans and Latinos, who typically vote Democrat. So the strategy was brilliant. They did it in North Carolina. They've been doing it in Florida. In Ohio, they're moving forward, right? It's all over. They're doing it because they don't want to see a Barack Obama again. They want to guarantee that. And so a lot of these things that you hear, people don't talk about. Why? Because what you find out is that these corporate interests with their big money, who have the ears of elected officials, they buy silence. And so you don't hear, this is not the days where you have activist-oriented politicians. Because for me, that's what I embody. And I believe I embody. Not the politician who's a career politician who wants to be a power broker in D.C. and make a life of this, but the politician or elected official who takes seriously two things, being an activist and being an issue advocate. So many things are going on in this community that you don't even hear the alarm raised about. No one says anything. And it's not just congresspersons, it's every level of government in this community. You do not hear anyone sounding the alarm.